these issues we face now. My written statement addresses several specific needs and policy issues in detail. In my short time before you today, I want to focus on the broader principle that the United States Virgin Islands is an integral part of the United States of America. Its people are American citizens, entitled to the same rights, privileges, and benefits as Americans who reside in Alaska or West Virginia or Wyoming. And as President Biden said last year, there can be no second-class citizens in the United States. I will ask that you be guided by this principle when you legislate for the Virgin Islands and all the other territories. For too long, the Americans living in the insular areas have been treated as foreign or other, as something less than American citizens of the soil. To cite a few examples, is disabled American who lives in a state entitled to receive SSI. If she moves to the Virgin Islands, she loses it. Medicaid funding to the territory has for decades systematically lagged behind funding for the poorest states. And under the tax laws, investment made by U.S. investors in the Virgin Islands are treated as investments in a foreign country. This means that tax rules designed to disincentivize American investments in foreign tax havens like the Cayman Islands apply equally to the investment made in the American territories. I ask this committee today to change that, even if the Constitution permits that the federal government to treat American citizens living on American land unequally simply because that land is a territory. There is no question that Congress has the authority, and I would argue the moral obligation, to treat all Americans the same. Citizenship is not geographic. First, although our economy is recovering, we continue to cope with financial challenges. Significant amounts of appropriated disaster funds remain inaccessible to the territory because of unrealistic local match. By statute, Congress permits agencies to waive any requirement for matching funds provided to the territory. In practice, however, the authority is never used. I respectfully urge the committee to amend the code to require agencies to exercise that authority. Second, federal tax policy has imposed significant constraints on our ability to attract private investment. The tax code treats U.S. investments in its own territories as foreign investments, making them subject to the so-called GILTI tax, which is designed to discourage American companies from stashing profits in foreign tax havens like the Caymans. The U.S. Virgin Islands is neither foreign nor is it a tax haven. It is a U.S. territory whose tax laws are promulgated by Congress. Third, the economic problems resulting from the hurricanes and COVID have now further been aggravated by the EPA's decision last May to shut down our refinery, costing us 800 jobs and $663 million in reduced GDP. We all share the EPA's concern with safety, but it's not clear that the EPA understands the unique importance of the refinery to the economic, financial, and social well-being of the Virgin Islands community, specifically St. Croix. Environmental justice is a hollow victory without economic opportunity. I therefore ask for Congress assistance in working with the territory and the EPA to ensure that the refinery is permitted to responsibly and safely reopen as soon as possible. Fourth, we are urgently seeking restoration of adequate funding for the territory's highway. That funding was cut to the bone in 2012 and has never been fully restored. With predictably deleterious effects on our roads, yet another example of Americans receiving poor treatment simply because of where they live. Singling out the 4 small territories for funding cuts was unfair and ignored their uniquely pressing transportation funding needs. I respectfully ask the committee to support a restoration of our highway funds to the levels we received before 2012. My written statement describes additional issues, importance including a permanent fix to Medicaid, and the fiscal cliff that will occur in February, permanently restoring the cover-over rate for the rum excise taxes that are so important to our economy, and extending supplemental security income to residents of the Virgin Islands and other territories who are currently denied. In closing, I wish to say, I'm an American, just as you are. My constituents are Americans, just as your constituents are. They should receive the same consideration and the same treatment from Congress and the rest of the federal government that their fellow citizens on the mainland do. I urge you to move beyond the days when it was acceptable and even expected that the Americans I serve would be treated differently than the Americans you serve. There is so much that we can do together to improve the lives of the people of the Virgin Islands and the other territories to bring us up to the level of our fellow citizens on the mainland. All we ask is the gracious assistance that you have provided tremendously over the course of this global pandemic, that you continue to do the same and remember us as friends in the Virgin Islands. Thank you for considering this testimony and your support for our fellow Americans in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Thank you, Governor Bryan. Now we'll have Governor Guerrero. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct.
Yes, you are, sir.
Thank you.
Chairman Munchin, Ranking Member Marshall, and esteemed members of the committee, a warm holiday from Guam, where America's Day truly begins. I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony on behalf of our island and her people on advancing issues and policies important to the territories. Mr. Chairman, as a former governor, you know full well the challenges we face, and I want to personally acknowledge your longstanding commitment to addressing many of the perennial issues we continue to confront, particularly during these uncertain times. COVID-19 has undoubtedly tested the human capacities and spirit of communities across the globe. But as Americans, as Chamorros, we are resourceful and we are resilient. With 94% of Guam's eligible population protected, we've prevented our healthcare system from collapsing, and at the end of the day, lives were saved. I am grateful to the Biden administration and the Congress for their support in ensuring that states and territories have the resources to continue to combat this virus. Beyond resilient, we are equally resourceful. Traveling nurses assigned to Guam can vouch for the tenacity of our local healthcare heroes who quite literally keep the hospital roof from falling. But Band-Aid fixes are not a long-term solution for our facilities, which are desperate need of critical care. In 2019, the Army Corps of Engineers assessed and recommended that our public hospital be replaced to ensure safety and accreditation. Last year, the House passed the Build Back Better Act, which included $347 million to construct a new hospital as recommended by the Army Corps. Although we are engaged in pandemic response, we remain focused on recovery. Along with economic diversification, we cannot abandon our number one industry. Before COVID-19, 1 out of 3 jobs were tourism related. Now, arrivals have decreased by 92% and thousands have lost work. With a full recovery not expected within the next 3 years, I ask this committee to consider passing an additional relief package specifically for territories to address previous federal aid disparities and our prolonged hardship due to reliance on international tourism. To achieve full recovery, we will need help. Guam's H-2B worker population went from 0 in May 2018 to over 2,000 workers last month due to the military buildup. However, the H-2B visa exemption only helps the construction sector, mainly for the construction of a new Marine Corps base, and will expire in 2023. As we diversify our economy, we will need more workers for both civilian construction and non-construction industries as we develop the skill sets for these new ventures. I ask you to extend the exemption to 2029 and establish a Guam-only temporary need criteria within the H-2B program that would recognize other qualified need as determined by the governor of Guam. There is congressional precedence for such a program to be developed, and I hope that we can explore this further as such a program will need congressional action. Long before our struggles with the pandemic, territories were facing another healthcare crisis, mainly inequity with Medicaid. Temporary efforts have provided more funding to Guam and increased our matching rate. However, we will soon revert to annual caps and expiration dates for federal Medicaid funding and be required to match at a high 55-45 ratio. Therefore, I ask you to remove our Medicaid funding cap and expiration dates and base our matching rate on per capita income like the states in the United States. On the Compacts of Free Association treaties, I ask to participate in treaty renegotiations to include the following amendments. full reimbursement for future expenses borne by Guam attributed to compact migration, debt swap of past unreimbursed expenses, screening originating in the FAS prior to arrival to Guam, extension of Medicaid coverage to FAS citizens in their home nations, and expansion of low-income housing tax credits. On self-determination for the people of Guam, I ask you to pass a bill to advance a process to allow us to articulate our desired political status. I ask you for your favorable consideration to allow Guam as eligible benefactors of Senate Bill 2798. Lastly, I ask you to amend the bipartisan infrastructure law to include Guam in the state digital equity capacity grant program and to pass and to build back better. To pass Build Back Better, which would be significant to Guam by expanding Medicaid and the child tax credit, extend SSI to Guam, provide more support in education, housing, childcare, and infrastructure needs, especially for a new public hospital, and position Guam's economy for stronger growth, which will advance our nation's competitive global position. We look to your leadership and assistance in addressing these issues for Guam. On behalf of a grateful island, Sidrus Maasi, and thank you for all of your efforts to protect not just our nation, but the islands and the territories in our Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Now we have Governor Magal from Samoa.
Talofa and greetings from American Samoa. I want to thank you, Honorable Chairman Menching, Ranking Member Marshall, distinguished members of the committee for this opportunity to share with you some of the challenges facing our territory. And thank you for your ongoing effort to improve our nation. First of all, I would like to thank Chairman Menching of all the hard work and committee that has put into this effort. Thank you for the role in passing the ARPA and a bipartisan infrastructure bill investment. This funding has allowed us to realize what we have hoped and dreamed of. In a year, we have repatriated thousands of citizens in the face of COVID-19 and are able to work around travel restrictions, limiting flights to and from the U.S. to 2 in a month to American Samoa. Our vaccination effort has reached more than 80% of our population counting. And we continue to push through with our quarantine operations with the oncoming flights. It has been a roller coaster for American Samoa, and God has been good to us amongst the highs and lows of 2021. This pandemic has turned our world inside out. Thus, trying to get back to normalcy is a challenge. From health, welfare, security, education, food safety and security, infrastructure, life, our freedom, and faith are all being tested by the COVID-19. We're fighting on the front line for life and death because of the pandemic. Leaders can't suspend other long-term challenges of our nation, i.e. the global warming and infrastructures, education, and so forth. Again, thank you for ARPA and thank you for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Supports our states and territory in the U.S. With all this, American Samoa faces challenges in expediting these emergency funds. We are seeking relief of matching local funds. We ask a more flexible usage of categories of federal fundings to be reallocated locally. And due to the isolation, shipping, transportation for goods, fuel, building materials, not consistent and currently very slow, and especially the high cost of supplies recently, we are requesting an extension for end date or life of these fundings. We are now planning for a new hospital facility that was investigated by the Army Corps of Engineers, mandated by Congress. That's going to cost $700 million. But now we are investing into that effort with the fundings from the COVID with the 300 millions. We're still asking for more fundings to fulfill this requirement. Terminal buildings at the airport, bridges access ease of operation and security for travelers. Airport is one of our projects that we're expanding the services to for incoming flights to American Samoa. Sea transportation services to outer islands proved difficult due to limited vessels and shipyards maintenance services. It's another big project that we're trying to maintain and facilitate. With the help of Congresswoman Ufatali Radaragan and the U.S. Army Corps, we are on our way in securing 2 landing crafts to service our neighboring island, and our shipyard services improve its maintenance schedule. Funding for our schools has relieved pressures in old and worn-out buildings, needed maintenance and preparation for distance learning in case of emergency, and community spread in the COVID cases. We have been able to use funding to source and improve on technology in our network, not only in education, but our government. Being isolated in the South Pacific, access to broadband is a critical link to the outside world and our security. Along with our aging clean water infrastructure, long overdue road restoration has given us gratitude for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. This has been a welcome relief to our territory, and it has relieved ongoing pressure and anxiety in dealing with our aging infrastructure. Given the current plans and projects funded by this legislation, the threat of climate change and rise in sea level consistent to loom over our islands in real time. As a result, we plan to create barriers through seawalls, other mitigation efforts to resolve this horrifying threat. We are also preparing ourselves for migration to higher ground from the sea level rising and towards the hills and mountains, and the threat in tsunami, volcanoes, earthquake remains constant threat and increasing hazard, causing anxiety to our people. Again, this is our cry to the Congress in Government of American Samoa, and we ask for your flexibility in how we use the fundings that was given for emergency uses. Thank you very much for all the support, and thank you very much for the helping American Samoa along the infrastructure is rebuilt. And thank you very much for America.
Thank you, Governor. And now we'll have Governor Pierluisi from Puerto Rico. So you might want to keep talking. We'll tell you if it's working.
Chairman Manchin, ranking members Marshall, and members of the committee. Thank you for holding today's hearing regarding the state of the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico. I am pleased to report that Puerto Rico is emerging from a challenging period with strength and optimism. Our government's debt restructuring has been approved. The rebuilding from the devastation caused by the hurricanes and the earthquakes is underway. And our COVID vaccination rates are amongst the highest in the country. But much work remains to be done. We have strategically allocated federal funds related to the pandemic to mitigate its effect on our public health and our economy. This has helped provide a sustained rise in economic activity indexes. We're seeing a considerable drop in unemployment, increase in job creation, and positive economic growth that had not been seen in years. As Puerto Rico's economy recovers and we continue to promote its growth, we must work with Congress to receive fair treatment in domestic social programs such as Medicaid and Medicare, and join forces to do work necessary to ensure Puerto Rico's prosperity. Puerto Rico has recently reached the most important milestone of the debt restructuring process with a now confirmed plan of adjustment. This paves the way for Puerto Rico to exit its bankruptcy process with a stable and sustainable balance sheet and prudent management of our public finances in the future. While the plan of adjustment and Puerto Rico's revised fiscal plan are foundational milestones, and the Oversight Board has had positive impacts on our financial management structures. The board has become another layer of bureaucracy that frequently delays and sometimes even impedes government execution, and that imposes public policies that do not reflect the will of the people. Also, lack of clarity as to when the Oversight Board should end its work on the island is something that needs to be addressed. My administration is committed to working with you to protect the democratic rights of the people of Puerto Rico to be governed by those they elect. On the other hand, Puerto Rico, this committee, Congress, and the Biden administration have committed significant resources to Puerto Rico's own Build Back Better program after the ravages of the hurricanes and the earthquakes. I am pleased to report significant advances in these efforts during my administration. 2022 will be a key year in our reconstruction with thousands of rebuilding projects for schools, housing, roads and bridges, water and sewer facilities, and the electric grid. Just as our nation is wrestling with a transition to a new energy future, so is Puerto Rico, saddled with an antiquated electrical infrastructure that devastated by the storms. Puerto Rico is moving away from fossil fuels, energy regeneration, and towards renewables. While we're working to rebuild the island's economy and its infrastructure, there remain certain long-term fundamental inequities that we need to address. Several of these inequities are in social programs, and Medicaid is a good example of how these inequities uniquely affect Puerto Rico. All American citizens who are eligible to receive Medicaid coverage get it, except for those who reside in Puerto Rico and the other U.S. territories. Puerto Rico, for example, must contend with a Medicaid program based on capped federal funding and additional short-term funding that lurches from cliff to cliff. Unless this issue is addressed before June 30th of this year, Puerto Rico will be forced to make very difficult choices among competing needs that will impact the accessibility and quality of its healthcare system. I ask this committee to ensure that the Medicaid program basically applied to Puerto Rico as in the States. Puerto Rico has been a U.S. territory for over 124 years. And it is important to realize that even after the successful restructuring of our public finances and the rebuilding of our infrastructure, Puerto Rico will remain hindered until our century-long status question is resolved. Our nation is engaged in a serious debate about voting rights, with both Democrats and Republicans underscoring that the right to vote is the cornerstone of our democracy. The people of Puerto Rico voted and chose permanent union with the United States through statehood as their path forward. So many Puerto Ricans have defended American democratic values at home and abroad that lack of representation and voting rights, as well as congressional inaction, are unacceptable. Congress must call for a vote on Puerto Rico's political future and commit to implementing the will of the majority. That is what democracy is all about. It is time to act. Thank you.
Governor, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And now we're going to have Mr. Atalig. Thank you, sir. Secretary.
Thank you, Chairman Manchin, for allowing me to speak and put in the record the oral testimony of our Honorable Governor Ralph Torres. Hafaday and Tiro from the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Marshall, and members of this committee for holding this important hearing to hear about the state of the U.S. territories. Please accept my apologies for not being able to join this hearing in person. When I last appeared before this committee in 2019, the world was a dramatically different place. The pandemic has altered the way in which the Senate conducts its important business, how millions of people around our nation manage their lives, and has dramatically altered the state of the U.S. territory of the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. In the CNMI, we firmly believe that we are Mariana strong. Being Mariana strong is a recognition that we have within us the resilience to overcome tremendous challenges, uniting even when we disagree, and rebuilding and recovering as one community. While the nation works towards adjusting to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have experienced a decade and more of singular events reshaping our lives over and over again. Typhoon Sudalor in 2015 and Super Typhoon Yutu in 2018 devastated the islands, destroyed many homes, closed commercial activity, and reset our understanding of our vulnerabilities against a changing climate. The nature of this present crisis is different for the Sinamay in many ways. The secondary impacts of the crisis and our mitigation response levied a disproportionate burden on our small tourism-focused economy. Since the collapse of the Sinamay's manufacturing sector, the economy is solely reliant on international travel and tourism. This pandemic halted this sole economic driver in its tracks and once more left the Sinamay peering over the edge of another economic depression. We were not alone this time, however, and our challenges were shared by communities throughout the nation. We were incorporated into the national discussion and, most importantly, aided in the national response. I am grateful for the assistance we have received in the American Rescue Plan Act, and I thank the members of this committee for your support of the needs of the territories. The Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act will allow the Sinamay to invest in critical infrastructure and address resources needs to ensure that our communities can grow while withstanding current and future weather and climate-related challenges with minimal physical damage or disruption to our communities. As the Sinamay looks at the possibilities made available through federal government assistance, I must reinforce a message that I have brought to this committee many times before. The issues of the Sinamay's labor force are well known by this committee. And I ask once more, and thank you for your willingness to assist in fostering a strong U.S. workforce in the Sinamay. I am proud to say that the Sinamay has taken the mandates of the Northern Mariana Islands U.S. Workforce Act seriously and have made considerable progress for the U.S. workers in our economy. Should the timely deployment of federal resources to support the economic needs of the Commonwealth be of importance to Congress, a nuanced understanding of these challenges and a new look into the accessibility of the CW1 to support these goals in the Sinamay is warranted. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and ARPA provided the opportunities to address many of the longstanding concerns of the Sinamay that are specific to our ability to better manage our economic development and make a real investment in the infrastructure of the Sinamay and the lives of its people. As the nation works to build resilient infrastructure with a once-in-a-generation investment through Build Back Better, there are opportunities to acknowledge and address the unique capacity and infrastructure challenges of the U.S. territories in order to work towards national efforts to provide immediate and long-lasting relief to the communities and businesses. I request your partnership in seeking a permanent allotment of 3,000 CW1 permits to support construction activities that are inclusive of those unrelated to presidential declared disasters. During the transition period as a means to deploy funding to support critical infrastructure projects and provide for an additional means to support employment across various sectors of our economy. We are working to respond to the many needs of the Sinamay's infrastructure, but we see a tremendous opportunity to advance the real progression towards equal standards of living with the larger United States through the Build Back Better initiative. I've spoken in support of the Biden's administration's Build Back Better proposal, and we greatly appreciate the work of the White House in listening to the needs of our islands. I ask for your consideration and support of the Build Back Better and request further consideration of the challenges experienced by the territories and the many ways continued investment in the long-term potential of our islands expands the power of this great country around the world. Despite its supreme challenges, I do wish for these islands I love to be defined by these limitations. The hardworking people of the Sinai who are used to struggle and hardship are also deserving of a modern infrastructure that supports economic development, a better quality of life, safety and health, and consideration for health of the environment. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to provide this written testimony on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I am hopeful for the progress that will be made with the federal assistance for the betterment of our nation and the people of the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. Sidus Masi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank all of you. Now we're going to start our questioning from the senators, and I'll begin with, I'm going to ask a couple, general question to all of you and think about this. How is inflation harming you or helping you or not affecting you, whatever? If inflation is a problem, how about COVID? Is COVID, you see a downturn there? Is it still rising? And have we done enough in the U.S. to support you with all the tools that you need to try to keep all of your people as healthy as possible and your vaccination rates? Final question I'll ask is, what part of the COVID response that we had, the COVID assistance, over $5.4 trillion and another 1.2 coming in the infrastructure. What was the greatest help you had that you thought was a benefit for your island, for your people? And what more can we do to help? So if you want to start, we'll just start, Governor Bryant, with you and inflation, COVID, and then also the assistance of the COVID relief.
Thank you, Senator. I'll start on a positive note. The COVID relief was a blessing. The CARES Act, the initial $75 million we had was very flexible. We used it to do a number of things, including manage the incredible amount of marine traffic we had come to the Virgin Islands after everyone else in the Caribbean closed their ports. Inflation, just to put it in perspective for you, a bucket of chicken in the Virgin Islands is $50. That's fast food Kentucky Fried Chicken. That was before COVID. Now we're seeing construction, everything going through the roof.
How much is a bucket of chicken now?
It's probably 60. The 1,200 square foot home, affordable home in the Virgin Islands, 1,200 square feet is $450,000. We're still recovering from 2 hurricanes, and everything, 90% of everything, probably 95% of everything we have is shipped in. So under tremendous duress. The flexibility of funds is the most important thing to us as we move through COVID. We have storm damaged hospitals. One in St. Croix that we haven't been able to open the temporary hospital yet. So the COVID was a particular challenge, but we have been doing well in the Caribbean. And because of those dollars, testing.
What's the percentage of your citizens to be?
52% by the CDC, but by the new census, 65% of our people are vaccinated and 85% of people over 65 are vaccinated.
I'm going to have to ask you all to, if you can, to expedite that because we don't have so much time. So, Governor, if you can, yes.
Thank you very much, Senator. Our COVID vaccination rate for eligible population, this is 5 years and older, is 95%. Our total population vaccination rate is 85%. During our COVID relief, the biggest help really is the testing, the vaccinations, the monoclonal treatments, and also bringing in some healthcare resources, personnel that have come through FEMA, military, and also we used our National Guard. And the ability to use the National Guard with the extensions of Title 32. Inflation, as the previous Governor Bryan stated, we are also impacted with high cost of prices as a result because of the shipping costs and also because of cost in gas, fuel, and so forth. So
Most of the supply chain?
yes.
And okay. And
Right now, our grocery stores are half empty because of the ships not coming in as a result of what's happening out in California with the containers being spilled out and not being able to be offloaded and sent off to the various
Sure.
ships.
What was the greatest help you received from the COVID package after all the COVID packages we tried to help with last year? Which one helped you the most?
The ARP
ARP?
was one of the best ones.
Okay.
Yes.
We have I think I have Governor Magu I think I bet that, yeah. Malga. Governor Malga, how about yourself?
Mr. Chairman, the honorable members of the committee, American Samoa feels the same problems or issues with the neighboring territories. Inflation is one of we want to address. The cost of living has gone up since the COVID-19. For instance, a cement bag that cost about $8 is now more than $20 per cement bag. And cost of building materials has went up as well. The ship transportation in the oceans and sea are very slow to American Samoa. So a lot of our projects and what we do here in American Samoa has to be await for shipping to come in. Food security is another issue that we're going to be facing in the near future because of the sea transportation is slow and not forthcoming as usual. Usually we get 2 ships a week, and now we're getting about 2 ships a month.
How about
And that's
COVID?
the
How's
problem
COVID
right
affecting you,
now.
sir, if I may ask?
COVID, yes, COVID, we have,
Percentage-wise.
thankfully for the vaccination part of American Samoa, we have 82% vaccinated, and we're still working on getting make sure up to the 90+%.
Great. What was the greatest help you got from the COVID package?
We have restarted the infrastructure build-up since COVID in terms of building our infrastructure to cope with the case, just in case the COVID spread to American Samoa. We have rebuilt the schools. We have rebuilt some of the health facilities as well as our LPG.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
sir, so much, Doctor. And then we have Governor Pierluisi.
In terms of inflation, we are particularly concerned about the costs of construction. The Associated General Contractors the Puerto Rico chapter reports that the increase is about 25%, this is really unprecedented. And I'm concerned about it because we're in the midst of an unprecedented reconstruction effort using FEMA funding and CDBG-DR and MIT funding. So that's one
Do
that
you have a labor problem also?
we do. And
Do all of you have a labor problem?
Yes.
yeah, labor shortage, we lost some population. We're trying to attract some of that population back,
Gotcha.
including in the construction
Gotcha.
sector. In terms of the COVID, I have to say that we've done very well. I mean, our vaccination rates are on the top. And by the way, look what happens when you treat us equally. You treated Puerto Rico equally in terms of the number of vaccines, medicines, test kits, and so on. And we did better than most states.
It's a great point.
And now, one thing you asked about the CARES program, the CARES and American Rescue Plan. I have to say that when giving flexibility is very good. We were able to incentivize the economy. We not only gave premium pay incentives to essential workers in our economy, we also incentivized workers to come back to their places of employment in the middle of the pandemic. And we incentivized our tourism industry, which is key for our future. So that flexibility I have to praise.
Okay, and if Mr. Hagler, very quickly, if you can give us a little breakdown very quickly, because I've taken much more time than I should have.
Yes, thank you. As far as inflation, we among the territories have the same experience.
Same.
Shipping cost, the cost of goods coming here from the mainland.
Labor,
Our COVID numbers we have a little spike right now, but we're doing really good. Our vaccination rate is 99.3% as a
oh my
population.
goodness.
Yeah.
You win the ribbon today.
We have tools. You mentioned the tools from the different packages.
Uh-huh.
FEMA has been great, a
Good.
great partner since the devastation disasters we've had. We've continued that partnership. As far as what's the most benefit package, obviously it's the ARPA and the sections where funding was available for the territory government with provisions of government and monies to give and help households. So we gave our own local stimulus as well as assisted our people with their utilities.
Thank you. I'm going to go vote. Senator Heinrich is going to take over for me, and then we're going to go to Senator Langford right now for his questioning.
right now.
Right now. Senator Marshall left you.
Thank you. Y'all, thanks for being here as well. I appreciate the engagement. This is helpful for us to be able to get context. Obviously, most of us don't get out to where you are very often. And so we are scattered across every time zone. And so grateful to be able to have the dialogue and to be able to go through the key issues. I appreciate the insight. My questions actually are dealing with an issue, dealing with the Northern Mariana Islands specifically. So I know we are actually currently multiple time zones away to be able to go through this conversation as well. But I want to be able to ask about some of the immigration policies there and the influence of China in specific and what's happening in the islands. What are you seeing as far as traffic, individuals, tourism, and such coming into the islands at this point from China?
Thank you, Senator Lanford. Obviously, with the pandemic and the effects of international travel, we've had zero travel tourism from China. We do have a travel bubble with South Korea, but as far as China is concerned, the last couple of years, it's a non-factor.
So go back 2019 and before, because we saw a pretty rapid rise of Chinese nationals construction. I know there were several different challenges with labor laws being violated with the 45-day basically visa process to be able to come from China, that we saw some Chinese companies coming and doing construction, bringing in Chinese nationals, not paying them basic wages there, and then moving back and forth. What do you anticipate happens once we get to the other side of COVID, even so, Lord come, when that day comes? What do you anticipate happens? Do we return right back to that again?
No, thank you for that question. This pandemic gave us an opportunity to revisit a lot of the policies we have as a Commonwealth. And one of the issues is in our tourism sector, obviously. We had issues with, unregistered Airbnbs and attracting foreigners from coming in. And we've working very closely with the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors that are looking at different policies and issues to correct things. It gives us an opportunity to reset and make some policy decisions to better and improve on some of those issues.
Terrific. Want to get a chance to be able to follow through on that some. 2009, when the new visa process came into place on that, with Chinese nationals able to come in faster and easier into the process. My understanding from the records that we can find, and we haven't found all records on this, but my understanding from the records that foreign individuals that were foreign born coming into the islands and having a child, there were 10 in 2009, but by 2018, there were 600. That there seemed to be an influx of individuals coming from China to the Northern Mariana Islands, having a child there. Obviously, that's significant for us in the United States if a Chinese national is actually coming in to be able to have a child there. Have you seen that trend? Where's that trend in 2019? That's the year we don't have. Did that continue? Once we reopen again at post-COVID, what happens with that type of tourism?
That's an excellent question. I think what we've done locally is address that. Our Commonwealth Health Center has spiked the cost for foreigners to get services in our hospitals for delivery and things of that nature has spiked up. It has reduced the number. You got to also think, keep in mind, we don't control our borders in terms of immigration.
Right.
And so when these people come in and go through, Customs and Border Patrol, we're stuck with the challenges that was allowed to be brought in.
What do you need from us to be able to help you? Obviously, raising the price in the hospitals and everything else for delivery costs. There's a lot of folks who be willing to pay a lot of money to be able to have American citizenship. I get that, and have access to the rest of the country. What do you need from us to be able to help you in these challenges?
I think we need some policy changes and control, a little bit more flexibility in our control of the borders. As we've had that control in the past, we didn't have that issue prior to that. But I think, Senator Lanford, this is a question that I'll bring back to
Okay.
our leaders and be responsible to give a great
Okay,
response.
well, I'd very much appreciate that. Obviously, we don't want to hurt tourism. That's a major feature of the economy, and we understand that, want to be able to recover again. But we want to be able to protect the integrity of the workforce, what's actually happening there, and also the multitude of issues with birth tourism
Mhm.
that can dramatically affect what's happening in the entire country with that. So I'll look forward to getting a chance to get your input and ideas back. Thank
Thank
you.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you again, governors and secretary, for being here as well. So appreciate your comments today. Governor Bryan, let me start with you. After Hurricane Irma and Maria, it was clear that the islands were struggling to rebuild, as well as how critically important federal disaster funding was to that rebuilding. Can you describe how rebuilding and recovery have progressed, and particularly given the challenges that you face because of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, we have definitely, thank you for that, Senator. We have definitely struggled for the first, we've been in office 3 years now, and the first 2 years was a lot of cleaning up and getting to a right place with FEMA. With the advent of Deanne Criswell as the administrator coming from a state, she has been tremendous in helping us resolve a lot of those matters. Still, we have a lot of matters pending. Key places like our roads and especially our hospitals are not done yet. Our schools are not rebuilt. As you can imagine, having COVID-19 and shutting down of all these government offices with one hospital on each island, we had to continuously delay this from happening. But we have been very strategic, and I'm happy to report that our fiscal policy, our fiscal situation has vastly improved. Our insolvency and our retirement system, yesterday we had a positive vote from our legislature. We're going to resolve that. We paid off a lot of our debts, and thanks to this body, we're forgiving over $300 million in community disaster loans. So we're coming along nicely. We still have some challenges with HUD and getting those funds out quickly so we can start rebuilding homes. But other than that, we're doing well.
Thank you. And Governor Pierluisi, same question to you. Rebuilding after the hurricanes, what progress have you made? And talk about, if you would, your energy independence that you are looking at doing as well, or at least the clean energy that you're looking at incorporating in Puerto Rico.
The reconstruction is well underway. For about 3 years after the hurricanes hit us, and this was back in 2017, for about 3 years, a bit more, we were basically getting emergency assistance, repairing, but not really dealing with permanent projects. Last year, I took office in January. We started doing permanent projects, and now the estimate is that we'll be having 2,000 construction projects ongoing this very year. And this, you're talking about the whole wide range of infrastructure projects. Now, the economy did very well last year, amazingly so. We grew. We hadn't grown for some time. So it was a 3% growth. The New York's Federal Reserve, the New York chapter, said that our economy performed the best in their region, particularly in unemployment and employment numbers. We've always been lagging in terms of labor participation. There has been a very significant increase in labor participation lately, and our unemployment is at a level that we hadn't seen for more than 10 years. So we're on our way back. Having said that, you mentioned energy. We're in the midst of this energy transformation, and let me tell you, it is challenging. We have a very aggressive and proactive renewable energy portfolio set in law, and I am committed to doing that, turning to renewables. But in the process, we have, at any time, roughly 40% of our energy production comes from oil-burning plants. And it is very likely that we won't be able to comply with EPA air emission standards in the coming years. I need to turn to LNG in a hurry. So I need help from the federal government so that we use LNG as a transition energy while we turn to renewables, which is our goal, it's our standard. So that's a challenging area. The system is stable as we speak. We privatized the transmission and distribution of energy in Puerto Rico. There were some growing pains, but now it's clearly stable. And on the generation side, we're about to privatize as well the operation and maintenance of our legacy assets, our generation plants. So, and we will, because we couldn't keep doing more of the same. The energy system in Puerto Rico was a public-owned monopoly that really underperformed, and it was really embarrassing the way it acted after the hurricanes. We don't want to go back there. So I'm committed to doing this transformation, but again, I admit that it is challenging.
Thank you. I know my time is almost up. I'm going to submit the rest of my questions for the record. And I am interested, Governor, in your comments about PROMESA and winding down the board and what that looks like. I will submit those for the record, however.
Okay.
Thank you.
Senator Marshall's going to let Senator Murkowski go next. So
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for having this hearing. I think it is an oftentimes underappreciated part of this committee's jurisdiction is the oversight that we have of our territories, and the fact that we only get an update every seemingly couple years is really not often enough. I was interested in listening to the responses to Senator Manchin's question about the impacts from inflation, COVID, workforce. And I'm just reminded that what happens in the United States is what is happening out on your islands, but it's just magnified 10, 20, 30, 40 times over. Because when you are when you're a group of islands like we have in the Northern Marianas, where you've got what round numbers 50,000 people collectively, and you have an opportunity to access infrastructure funds, super great, you get the money, but you have no workers. We're going to be talking about how we can connect everybody, but you've got some geography considerations that people in Nevada and New Mexico just cannot appreciate. And so the opportunity for us to understand the impact of COVID, the impact of what it means as a territory to be the recipient of federal resources to help you out, but to understand that you need certain amounts of flexibility. Mr. Secretary, I was out there in CNMI back in 2018 when there were no available workers, and we were talking about the CW1 worker visas then. And so I can only imagine that after all you've gone through since that time, suffering the hurricanes that you have, the damage and the rebuilding that you need to do, now you've got an opportunity to build something, but you don't have workers. And I was in the USVI, and it was good to see you again, Governor Bryan. But when we looked at that hospital that had been blown out, you could see through the entire hospital there on St. Croix after the damage from Hurricane Maria. And to hear you say you're still building out after that, okay, now we want to come in with broadband, we want to help with infrastructure, but where are we getting the workforce? And so this is more of a rhetorical question for you all right now, but know that that is something that I'm keying in very dramatically. Governor Bryan, you mentioned the tourism, and I know in all of your other areas, same as well. You rely on tourism for that economic base, but when you can't get, whether it's the seasonal workers, COVID has impacted your ability to get cruise ships. We relate to that directly in Alaska. We lost an entire 2 years of our tourism season. So maybe this is just me saying I feel your pain, but it's something important for this committee to recognize that we need to give you some flexible tools when it comes with the benefits of whether it's ARPA funding or whether it is the funding that is coming our way under the infrastructure bill. Let me ask about just energy costs, because you have all indicated to the chairman here that cost of living has gone up, but in so many of the islands, I know you're powering yourself still off of diesel generation. You've got a little bit of renewable that you're trying to integrate, but realistically, how much progress have you made when it comes to to more affordable energy for your respective islands? And we'll start with Governor Bryan.
Thank you, Senator. And definitely, I love that you feel it. So, and understand where we're coming from. Just to put it in perspective, with the rising energy costs now in terms of fuel, our energy costs are going to go to 48 cents a kilowatt hour. That's then an average American pays like 10 cents a
Yep.
kilowatt hour. So we need speed in getting to energy independence and getting more renewables in there. So that's tremendously impactful of what we're doing. We have money to do it now, but it takes time, permitting, planning, and all the rest. Our housing situation is desperate as well too, because the hotels were destroyed. So everybody has to stay in Airbnbs. Airbnbs are 10 times as more profitable as workforce housing. So our middle class is really doing well collecting those rent, but our working class can't get any place to stay. One bedroom went in St. Croix from $600 to $1,500 a month. Great for the economy, bad for workers. There was another piece of your question.
Well, let me, because my time is out and I really can't go over too much, but I just want to ask Governor Guerrero, in Guam, again, Guam is an island where you're still pretty much reliant on diesel for your power generation. What impact has that had on the people in Guam?
It is very expensive for our people. And so we're progressing towards alternative solar energy. And our power generation is working towards meeting those mandated goals that we have set forth. Additionally, our gasoline costs, fuel costs for cars is $5.19 a gallon. And so what we're looking at is we're strategizing to the direction of electrical vehicles. And so certainly the infrastructure bill will help us with that. I would love to have all of our island transport be electrical vehicles. We're only 30 miles long and 8 miles wide, so we wouldn't have to be charging that frequently. So these are some of the ideas and innovations that we're trying to decrease energy costs to our residents and our island people so that there's more cash flow for them for more spending money for their families.
Mr. Chairman, I'm well over my time, but I think this is just true throughout all the region, the cost that people are paying for their fuel, for their electricity, for their vehicles. We've got to have different solutions. That's what this committee likes to focus on. But you're right, it takes a long time to make that transition, and you are in high-cost areas to begin with. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Governor Pierluisi, I was quite proud to introduce the Puerto Rico Statehood Admission Act along with a number of my fellow senators. And if passed, this legislation would serve as Congress's formal offer of statehood to Puerto Rico. There have been a number of plebiscites in Puerto Rico and on the question of statehood, including one just last November, I believe. What have Puerto Ricans communicated through these plebiscites?
Well, first and foremost, their desire to have a permanent union with the United States. Start with that. And what they're saying loud and clear, they've been saying it now for quite a while, is that they want equality. They want to be treated the same as their fellow citizens in the States. Now, the last plebiscite we had for the first time ever was an up or down vote on statehood. So there you could not say, hey, you left me out.
There was no option.
There was no option. It
clean
wasn't
choice.
well defined. Everybody knows what statehood is all about. So what we're doing here, our resident commissioner is sitting here in this hearing, resident commissioner Jennifer Gonzalez. She introduced a bill very similar to yours, along with Congressman Darren Soto. And it's a very straightforward bill, basically saying, let's have Congress call for a vote on statehood in Puerto Rico. And if we give you a majority, then implement it. Now, I recognize that there are other competing bills. And I also know that there's an ongoing effort to try to get a consensus bill. What I'll say to this committee, is that it is very important that we get a vote, that for the first time ever, Congress, at the very least, asks the people of Puerto Rico, the American citizens of Puerto Rico, to vote on their political future and then commit to implementing the will of the majority. That's what democracy is all about. If you want to do a multiple option bill, you can. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of the people's will. And that's all we're asking. It is only fair. And I know that Congress will have the last say. Congress, the way that the statehood works or could work is if a majority in both the House and the Senate vote for it. And we know that we'll have to go through that process. But the first step is the one that you're asking for. You did it in terms of statehood, and I respect that. I support that. But if for some reason you want to have multiple options and they're well defined, I have no problem whatsoever with it, so long as you ask the people of Puerto Rico for once and for all.
And I should say welcome
Express
to
their
your
wish.
resident commissioner as well. And it's been a pleasure to work with you both on this issue. You know, even with the majority of Puerto Ricans voting in favor of statehood, there is still an argument that a status convention is needed. Do you believe, Governor, that a status convention is necessary given the outcome of the recent plebiscites?
You would simply be prolonging an endless debate. To debate what? Status convention for what? I mean, that's not the
So
way
it really
Congress
doesn't
acts.
add anything to the process. It's
No.
not clear from just asking the people what they want.
Exactly. The best thing is ask the people directly. There will be a debate. They will be informed by the debate, and Congress should act on this. That's my ask.
So Governor, you used the
Recognizing
word,
that Congress has the last say, because this is not like we can impose this.
right.
I know.
Governor Pierluisi used the word equality. I remember Governor Bryant, I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but I think one of the things that should be very clear from this hearing is that we have a current system where an American citizen on the mainland is treated differently than an American citizen in a territory. For any of you, what message does that send? And, you know, what should we be hearing about the fairness or lack of fairness built into that and what we should do about it in law? And Governor Bryan, I'll let you start, and anyone else who wants to chime in.
I always go quickly. I always go first. I'll go quickly. I think it just says that there's an absence of equality. And when you look at, you add the fact that these are Black and brown people, and that they are probably among the more poorer Americans statistically, lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to education and opportunities, it's a slap in the face. So it's something that we should have an affirmative action on to make sure we right.
Governor.
I totally agree. I think it's very discriminatory against the people that live in the islands. And more importantly, I think our plight in Guam is much more for also going towards self-determination. Puerto Rico has had their plebiscite. We have not had our plebiscite. And so we are working towards trying to do that. And we are asking Congress for their support and their help in moving that forward. The United Nations has already said that the U.S. should allow Guam to go forward with their vote on self-determination. And I think the U.S. is slow in its support and in its articulation for our right to self-determination.
Anyone, Governor
As a
Pierluisi,
matter of federal policy, it makes no sense to treat American citizens in the territories differently, because we're not immigrants. We hop on a plane and move to the States any day. So in the case of Puerto Rico, it's different because we're asking for voting rights. We're asking to vote. We want to vote for the president and voting representation in Congress. And I agree. It's different than the other territories. But you should be treating American citizens the
But
same in terms of
individual
all federal
Americans.
programs. Yes.
yeah,
because
I think that would
otherwise-
shock most Americans to learn that if they
Yeah.
decide to move to a different location, that they get treated differently based on that. And I think that would be a surprise to most
Yeah.
folks. I am over my time as well, but I want to go back to our ranking member for the next round of questions.
All right, thank you, Chairman. My first question for Governor Maga. According to the United States Coast Guard, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing has replace piracy as the leading global maritime security threat. If illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing continues unchecked, we can expect deterioration of fragile coastal states and increased tension among foreign fishing nations, threatening geopolitical stability around the world, and end quote. So my question for you, Governor, is how does the Chinese illegal fishing around American Samoa and the region impacted your economy and the stability of your neighborhood?
Honorable Senator, yes, it does impact our economy with the canneries that we have in American Samoa. The problem with us in American Samoa is the enforcement part of that process. We don't have the resources to enforce over the 200 miles out of American Samoa Ocean. So that's we've been working hard with the Coast Guard in trying to implement ways to make sure that such policy and laws are implemented, are enforced. And like I said, it does affect us very seriously in terms of fishing in our ocean.
Thank you for that answer. I'll go to Governor Guerrero next. In my opening statement, I mentioned the threats currently facing Guam and the needs to face those threats, in particular those posed by China. Can you elaborate on the activities of China that are of concern to Guam?
So the activities of China is such that they are trying to win the war through economic success. And we see this throughout the neighboring islands, not so much in our islands, Senator, but we see it in the neighboring islands. And they would go in and offer loans, grants, and so forth. And of course, try to tie the islands to that commitment. And that is a very dangerous strategy, I think. Our relationship with the military bases has been so good. And as you know, they have made several practices in Guam, air practices, marine practices, and also to show force with China against to China that they are strong, that the U.S. is strong, and the forces are there, and to back off and not come by. My greatest concern is their arguments between Taipei, Taiwan, and China. And of course, the U.S. has made the position of an ally to Taiwan. And so if it comes down to battles and so forth, we are right there in the middle of the Pacific with the military bases there. So of course, we would participate and be involved. But that is a great concern for myself and our people in Guam.
Are your neighbors far enough along in the relationship, the business relationships with the Chinese that they have an opinion how that's working out? Or
I think for some countries, yes. And that some countries are in a position of relationships with China and the whole battle against one China policy. And so some of the island states are being very much in relationship and partnership with China, and some of them are in relationship and partnerships with Taiwan.
okay, I'll go on to the Secretary Adelig as well, kind of continuing our story about my questions about China and the Pacific. In 2019, Kiribati and the Solomon Islands severed their relationships with Taiwan and established better relationships with China. Are you concerned about China's moves in the Pacific with regards to your neighbors, where China might try and build military installations or expand illegal fishing? And what would that mean to the economy and your nations and your security?
Thank you, Senator. We are in the same sentiment as the territory of Guam. We share the same waters and the same distance. We're just half an hour flight away. But to the question of the economic dominance that they're trying to do in other neighboring islands, I don't have a straight answer from our position. We do know that other islands are benefiting, financially in terms of economic input into their economy. but we're under the U.S. flag, so we seek to this body for our assistance, and we continue to build on our partnerships. So I will bring back this question to our leadership and make sure we have a thorough answer and response for the committee.
Thank you so much, everybody. I yield back.
Before we turn to Senator Hirono, I just want to acknowledge the news that just broke that my friend and colleague, Ben Ray Lujan, is recovering in the hospital from a minor stroke. And I'm sure that you'll all join me in wishing him a very, very speedy recovery. Senator Hirono, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for letting us know about our colleague. Of course, we wish him a speedy recovery. I welcome all of the governors for coming to testify today, and Mr. Secretary. As we talk about the influence and the presence of China in the Indo-Pacific area of responsibility, I think that they very much had a presence in CNMI, correct, Mr. Secretary? Mr. Secretary?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Their presence were in terms of bringing tourists in.
Yes, so they had quite a presence, and I think they were bringing gaming into CNMI. At the same time, because of our relationship with CNMI, I believe that we are negotiating with CNMI for military training facilities and CNMI. Is that happening?
As part of the military buildup on Guam,
Yes.
there are also negotiations in terms of a divert air station in Tinian, in one of our islands.
Are those negotiations proceeding?
Has started already. I mean, the negotiations are completed. They're still, they've started the rebuild.
Thank you very much. I also serve on the Armed Services Committee, and the movement of our troops out of Okinawa and then to Guam, and then they need the training. So thank you very much for that support. The Governor Pierre Luisi, it's nice to see you. We served together in the U.S. House, so
Very nice to see you.
I have a few questions for you, but I'll start with Governor Guerrero and again, Mr. Secretary Atalig. We each have high populations of citizens of the freely associated states residing in our respective jurisdictions. I'm talking about Hawaii, of course. And then COFA citizens have been important and contributing members of society in Hawaii, Guam, and Marianas for decades. However, certain financial provisions of the compacts, including $30 million in annual compact impact funding, will expire in 2023. And while it is widely recognized that compact impact funding is insufficient to cover the costs borne by our affected jurisdictions, how would Guam and the Marianas be affected if the U.S. government failed to extend compact impact funding past 2023 and failed to renegotiate the Compact of Free Associations before they expire in 2023 and 2024? Governor Guerrero, start with
Thank you,
you.
Senator. If the government does not renegotiate those compact funding and continue on with those fundings and continue on with the migration ability of the COFA, then it, I think, would be a very unequal kind of treatment, because we will continue to have those migration over to Guam and not have the funding source to even help with those expenses and those impacts. You're absolutely right, 30 million is not enough. We have calculated our expenses to be about 150 million a year as a result of the impact of migration, which impacts our social services, our education, our healthcare. Now, I just want to make it very clear that we love our brothers and sisters from the islands, and we want to help as much as we can. But we would like to have the financial means and the funding source to continue on with that help. 30 million is not enough, but to stop 30 million, I think is significant in terms of helping with the expenses of the migration. And so it's not fair, I believe, if that the funding stops, but the migration continues.
Presumably, if the compacts do not get renegotiated, then there will not be an ability for the compact citizens to come to our territories and to our places. Mr. Secretary, would you like to add anything? I mean, I
Yes, I would
assume
like-
you would
I do.
you agree 30
Um,
million is not.
Although like Governor Leon Guerrero said, we love our brothers and sisters and we welcome them to our islands. However, we know that the current allocations for compact impact is very minimal and doesn't even put a dent in the cost that we put to provide the services to these people that come and visit and stay in our islands. So just in a similar note, without a renegotiation and more funding for the islands, it does put a burden in our government services that we provide.
I hope that finally restoring Medicaid eligibility to the compact citizens, I hope that is having a positive impact. We need to pretty much restore the capacity for them to be able to access other programs such as SNAP and all the other array of social programs. That's what some of us are working on. I am sorry that I've run out of time, so I did want to have a chat with Governor Pierluisi, but that will await. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me ask, first of all, is Senator Cassidy on? Or he logged off? He logged off, okay. Senator Kelly, do you know if he's on or logging off? And if not, we'll have a second round if anyone has a quick second round they want to go through. Senator Heinrich.
Just one quick follow-up question. I know Senator Cortez Masto raised this issue too. The whole, now that the plan of adjustment has been approved by the court, what is the role of the Financial Oversight Management Board? And do we need to take action to clarify when that reaches finality?
Yes, I believe you do. What's happening is this. We just approved, the federal court just confirmed the plan of adjustment for the government of Puerto Rico. That's a milestone. The bankruptcy is going to be behind us. We just need to issue the restructured bonds on March 15th, which is fast approaching. There are two other reorgs or restructurings, bond restructurings that need to occur. They're important. The power authorities, bond restructuring, as well as the highway and transportation authorities. Power authority, you're talking about $9 billion. The other one is $4 billion. So you're talking about serious bond restructurings. Once those two are done, and we are able to publish all outstanding or pending audited financial statements for the government of Puerto Rico, it'll be the ideal point for the board to part ways. And I say this with respect. Chairman, fellow former governor, I mean, you know that you all know the budget process is very important. That's where you set your priorities. That's where elected officials, I'm not talking about myself as governor, the legislators as well, set their priorities. And the problem has been that the board, before my tenure, became so granular in approving budgets in Puerto Rico that because Promesa says that they need to approve any reprogramming, it is incredible. It's becoming a bureaucratic a layer that we shouldn't have in Puerto Rico. We want to expedite things in Puerto Rico. Just let me give you a stat. In this fiscal year, starting in July, we have submitted to the board 267 reprogramming requests. And it takes roughly 3 weeks on average for the board to reply. I have been telling the board, hey, you need to expedite this. And so what we want is once the bond restructurings are done, once the audited financial statements are out, the spirit of Promesa, if not the letter says, once Puerto Rico is able to balance its budgets, and we will definitely be able to, given the debt restructuring that just happened, and once Puerto Rico regains access to the capital markets, and I tell you, the way that the bonds are being sold and at the prices they're being sold at, it shows that we have adequate access to the markets already. The board should not exist anymore. It is undemocratic. We did it. I was in Congress when we did it because we had no choice. The government then was about to default on its general obligation bonds. Nobody liked that vote. And some members of the Senate, a minority, didn't vote for it, but a wide majority did. And in the same happened in the House. If I'm telling you with a straight face that it's about time to start this conversation, and at some point provide so that the government of Puerto Rico substitutes for the board in dealing with PROMESA or any other restructuring effort in the future. It is for the better.
This question might have been asked, if I may. Okay, the only thing I would ask, do you all have a balance, do the territories have balanced budget amendments like states do?
We do. In Puerto Rico, as a
But you must have got behind, you must have had, I mean, it didn't
Yes.
work.
Yes,
Whoever, the discipline wasn't there, something happened.
the
because
discipline wasn't there.
As a former governor, I couldn't go a week without making adjustments. Every week, like clockwork, I had to make an
Exactly.
adjustment. So
Yeah.
if you got out of whack, it's because someone wasn't paying attention. The federal government stepped in. They're going to have to show good cause or reasons to give you the leadway again. And I think that's what we're probably running up against right now. I know it's been, and also the people that are administering this too. There's been a tug of war. Who's doing what, and this and that. I've heard all about that. Whose on whose side, right?
Yes, but again, we just went through this unprecedented bankruptcy process. The debt level we'll have is clearly sustainable. By the way, we were committed to paying roughly 25 cents of the revenues the government got. Now we'll be paying 7.8 cents on the dollar as opposed to 25 cents. It's incredible savings.
Right.
And we're doing all the right things. I have to give credit to the board. There's a lot more transparency in Puerto Rico's with respect to Puerto Rico's finances ever. And that's to the board's credit. But it comes a time when you need the elected officials to be the ones
Sure.
setting the priorities. And every 4 years we have elections like you do here. Nobody in Puerto Rico wants to go through this mess we went through. The austerity we faced in the last years was something. And we don't want to go there again.
The bond rating is
but
basically.
but I say this with respect. It's just a matter that it could be a simple, straightforward amendment to the PROMESA law. And when the time comes, once the PREPA, the power company restructuring happens and the highway authority restructuring happens, it'll be the ideal point, I tell you, to allow Puerto Rico to have self-government again, democracy again.
Senator Hirono, I think you might have had another question.
Just listening to your testimony and the high cost of everything in the territories of, I realize that a lot of the federal programs are administered differently or treated differently with regard to your territories. But one that I'm particularly interested in is how Medicaid is treated and that you have a cap, because I believe that access to healthcare is a right, not a privilege. And so the fact that we have a cap placed on all of you in terms of Medicaid is something that I am going to look at. And Governor Pierluisi, thank you. You're one of the people who mentioned that in your testimony, but it would probably help all of you to have us lift that cap. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Manchin, can I add one thing?
Absolutely.
In this conversation with Puerto Rico, all of us go through precarious financial situation. If this body would just allow the Treasury to give us an option to back our bonds with full faith and credit just for the small territories, as an option that would have to be approved by Treasury, that move alone would just reduce the amount of debt level, because we can go to market, refinance that debt at AAA, and probably save for us at least 10% annual payments from our budget and redirect that towards doing things for our own. We're doing that now with some of our rum proceed bonds and our general obligation bonds. We could do the same thing and put us all on very good footing.
Your bonds, I would assume that all of your bonds are based on basically the liquidity of your territory, correct? It's not basically with the full faith of the federal government and Treasury.
It is not.
Okay, that's something absolutely be happy to look into that. That makes a lot of sense. The thing about, I was going to say, is on balanced budget amendments, how we used to in the States, we did it, and is that it was part of an election process. If you were a governor for 4 years, you're running for reelection, and you had not had a bond increase or bond rating that showed that you were good fiscal managers, it would affect you. Ours is a balanced budget. We had to the end of the year. So we would basically make adjustments. We'd look at it every week, and on a monthly basis, we would make the adjustments so they wouldn't be so harsh at the end of the year. If you wait to the end of the year, they got so absolutely harsh and hard hitting that people just couldn't take it. But if you made gradual adjustments, as you could see your revenue and forecast and all that, and if I'm sure you all have people that are doing that in your finance department. We want you all to succeed. We really do. We want to help you, but that's something we can take. And maybe with this committee here, we'll get a letter, a bipartisan letter, asking the Treasury to give us an understanding of why they have not backed our territories with the full faith of the U.S. Treasury. You want to do that? You okay with that? We'll do that. So with that, any other questions that come before the committee? Any other questions to our panel? If not, the members will have until the close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record, and the committee stands adjourned. Thank you all.